All right, Myron and I decided that we were going to do 4 weeks of Daniel as opposed to 3, and so this is the last week of Ezekiel. Aren't y'all excited about that? Yeah, some people are. Some people are like, no, I want more. Well, I am excited because these last 9 chapters or so are all related. It is all about the temple. And starting next week, I will be going over Daniel chapter 1. And that's a pretty, I think at least, cut and dry chapter, easy to explain, but also full and rich of lots of different historical as well as spiritual lessons. So, let's dig into chapters 40 through 48. Before we even get to 40 through 48, we need to talk about the different types of interpretation that people have applied to this section. So, the first is literal. We'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the literal interpretation. Next is the premillennial. We will talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of the premillennial or dispensationalist interpretation. And then symbolic Christianity. We will also talk about, you guessed it, the strengths and weaknesses of that. And finally, apocalyptic. Slight spoiler alert, this is the approach that I will be taking this morning, is the apocalyptic approach. But we will also talk about the strengths and weaknesses of that. When you look online for Ezekiel 40 through 48 temple or Ezekiel temple, you're going to get lots and lots of different photographs, lots of different interpretations, lots of different pictures depicting a temple. You certainly understand that, but it looks different in every one of the pictures that you see. And the reason for that is a lot of the imagery and a lot of the words, a lot of the explanations that are used in here, while they seem specific, leave a lot to the imagination. And in leaving a lot to the imagination, it seems very against God's normal way of providing instruction. When Solomon built the original temple, the instructions were incredibly specific down to the last detail, and there was nothing left to the imagination. Here, there are certain aspects of the temple that are either not explained or not explained thoroughly enough as to merit it not being apocalyptic. But let's talk real quick about the literal interpretation. Some of the strengths for the literal interpretation. Oh man, that one was in my notes and I just went a page too late. The strengths of it. Ezekiel prophesied a return to the land. So that has been prophesied throughout the book. And so, the fact that the Israelites would be returning would be a literal return to the land. It's logical that God would provide guidance in building a temple, and he certainly provided guidance in building the temple. And so it's a logical explanation that if God is going to dwell again with the people, he's going to provide some sort of guidance, some sort of understanding. Ezekiel was a priest, and who better to present this message than a priest? It wouldn't just be any random person, it would be somebody who has access to the Father. And the temple actually connects, the building of the temple connects with the return of the exiles. God returns, the exiles return, it all does kind of fit there. But some of the weaknesses, the exiles didn't use the blueprint on their return. They didn't take what Ezekiel had said and go to it section by section and build it in that regard. In fact, the Israelites did not view this section literally themselves, which to me, we could stop there and be done. But the Israelites did not view it literally themselves, and so they did not build it in that way. Many measurements are non-specific. You will see the word cubits mentioned. Sometimes you'll see the word reeds mentioned. The cubit, it says a long cubit, is essentially 21 inches, is the idea. Regular cubit's about 17 inches, and then, a cubit in the hand's breadth is an extra 3.5, 4 inches. Well, if we're to go by cubits, then a lot of the things are actually incredibly small. Right? Even the 25,000 cubits becomes just a couple of miles long, which is not near big enough for an entire city. And then you have the other side of that, the reeds, which were a couple of meters long, pretty big. And if you use that interpretation, then it's too long and it goes actually past the river and it geographically doesn't fit. And so certain details then are impossible to construct. They just do not fit in the region. They do not fit with the population of the people. It doesn't work. As I mentioned earlier, certain parts of the temple are not addressed. Building would be unfeasible at best. And the prophecy, this is something that is true with all of these things. The prophecy is conditional. If the Israelites don't do what they were supposed to do, then whatever God had said doesn't have to come to fruition, because the prophecy is conditional upon how the Israelites act. In the same way that our salvation is conditional on our love, our faith, and our obedience to his word. If we don't obey his word continuously throughout our life, we're not guaranteed salvation. And so, that is the literal interpretation. The dispensational or the premillennial interpretation, some of the strengths are that it gives legitimacy for the theme of God's glory and his return. In other words, God will return someday. His glory will be on Israel, and so it provides legitimacy for that idea. It says that God's holiness would only return once the people returned, right? And so thus there is a necessity to return to the land, for God's people to return to the land so that his holiness could return. God said that he would dwell among the sons of Israel forever. Thus, a literal fulfillment sometime in the future is plausible. It's in chapter 43, verses 6 and 7, that he would dwell with the sons of Israel forever. The river of life, which we see in chapter 47, at least is possibly the river of life, is indicative of a potential end of history and beginning of the Messianic kingdom. The river is mentioned in Genesis, it's mentioned in Revelation, it's also mentioned in Ezekiel. And God's dwelling in his temple is predominant and is a part of the end-time descriptions in Revelation. And so there is some idea then that the dispensational or premillennial approach is the approach that we have to take. But there are, I think, rather glaring weaknesses to this approach. First, there is a requirement to switch between literal and figurative if you take this approach. Throughout the last 9 chapters, there are quite a few times that God mentions the necessity of sacrifices. And so you have to take that figuratively if you are a Christian. And then there's the other part of it that is incompatible with Christianity, which is it does not consider the atoning work of Jesus on the cross. If Jesus died on the cross, and yet sometime in the future we're going to return to this sacrificial system that the Jews had, why did Jesus die? What was the purpose of his death? It nullifies the atoning work of the cross. This view really overlooks the place of the church in the plan of God. It eliminates the necessity of the church because we're going to return back to temple worship. We're going to return back to that. It requires a literal fulfillment, which, as we've already addressed, there's issues with that. There's issues with a literal fulfillment. And it requires that the incarnation of Christ is skipped over. Emmanuel, meaning God with us. Well, interpreting it in this regard nullifies that Jesus was with us in a lot of ways. And so it certainly cannot be this. A few more just to, I guess, whet your appetite. The Old Testament was designed in order to lead us to Christ. The kingdom of God was fulfilled in the time of Christ. Jesus said, the kingdom is at hand, right? And so it fails to acknowledge that Jesus did establish his kingdom. He said that some of you will not taste death until you see my kingdom, right? And so the prophecy, again, is conditional upon the Israelites' faithfulness. All right. We're almost there, guys, I promise. Symbolic Christian. This one I found to be an interesting, I guess, mental exercise as to whether or not it was true. The same type of symbolic terminology that is utilized in Revelation by John is utilized here in some regards. These are some of the strengths. There's a framework for Christianity as it connects to the Old Testament and the New Testament. In other words, the type and antitype, right? There's an already built-in connection with the possibility that this could be about Jesus. This could be the prophecy of the Messiah. It draws upon the promise of the Davidic king who will rule his people. Jesus is the head of the church. There's a Davidic king, and so there's some of that. The one thing that is, I guess, really probably the biggest strength of this interpretation is if this is related to symbolic Christianity, it provides an incredibly important prophecy regarding the church that is otherwise absent in the Old Testament. And so there's a lot here that could work in its favor, but the problems with it, again, are pretty glaring. It had no bearing and no relevance to those in Ezekiel's day. And the whole purpose of this book was to encourage the Israelites. And so these chapters had no bearing to the people in Ezekiel's day if it is about Christianity. It's not referred to anywhere in the New Testament. And if this is a prophecy about the Messiah, if this is a prophecy about Jesus, this is a prophecy about the coming king, well, you bet they talk about it. They would have mentioned it in the New Testament for sure. Certain portions of this prophecy simply don't fit with Christianity. The priesthood, the allotments, the sacrifices, different things like that, they just do not fit. And so we're left with our last possible interpretation, which again, I gave you a spoiler earlier, is what we're going to go with. Apocalyptic. There's a lot of strengths, not a whole lot of weaknesses. But let's talk about the weaknesses first. Generally speaking, apocalyptic language does not use as many details as these chapters do when describing something. There's a lot of details in here. They are not all complete details, but there's a lot of details. Revelation also had a lot of details, but they were, I guess, fanciful, you might say. And so there's a lot of details here that seem to be very direct and related to things that people could do, as opposed to, an angel having one foot in, one sea and another in another, right? And so there's not always that. Many verses end up being left unanalyzed because no application can be made if this is apocalyptic. So those are some of the weaknesses. Let's discuss the strengths. This message can be and was directly applied to the exiles. And the message with that there's hope. There's hope in God, and there's hope of a future with God. And the Israelites desperately needed that. They had spent 6 years hearing Ezekiel talk about all of these negative and awful and terrible things. And 16 years of Israel's ministry was spent talking about the hope of God, talking about the return of the Father. And this message here, these 9 chapters, can directly be applied to the Israelites and the hope of the future with God. It fits with previous passages, including chapter 39, verses 21 through 29. It fits with the apocalyptic writing style of 38 and 39. And so it also fits with the non-apocalyptic writings in nature of regarding the return to the land, right? And so, it was prophesied that they would return to the land, and now there's this apocalyptic literature detailing that in some more detail with hope. Ezekiel used figurative and symbolic language throughout. In fact, multiple times it mentions he was taken up in a vision. Right? In a vision he saw. In chapter 47, 1 through 6, we see the water flowing through the temple. And this, to me, is an indication of the reality of the apocalyptic writing, because if you have a temple that God has designed, there will not be any issues or problems with it, correct? And yet here we see that there's water flowing from underneath the temple that ends up flowing so far that it creates a place where Ezekiel can swim. He wades through it, he's able to swim. When he comes back, the trees on the side of the bank are lush and green and vivid. And so that right there alone sets it in stone for me that this is apocalyptic literature. One of the other strengths of this is that there's no mention of a high priest. And we know from Hebrews, we know from dealing with Aaron and all throughout the entirety of history, Jewish history, that the high priest was incredibly important to the Jewish people. And so to not mention it is either intentional or an egregious oversight. It's one or the other. And it must be intentional because God does not miss things. God does not miss things. Some of the passages actually contradict or supersede the law of Moses, which is a really interesting thing to think about, that if this is taken literally or if this is taken as a future literal, then some of these things will actually supersede, they will go in front of or before of the law of Moses, the things that he has said, that God has already said, and God does not change. God does not change. There's no need to change the law from what he made. Romans chapter 7, verse 14, the law is good and righteous and holy. No need to change it. All right. So we're using the apocalyptic method. The plan today is to get through 9 chapters. I was actually expecting some laughter. There's the laughter. The goal is to get through 9. If we don't get through 9, that's okay. I think this will go out in an email. You'll have the notes at least. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask Myron. Chapter 40. No, you can ask me too. That's okay. Chapter 40. This chapter details another vision. So let's verify that that's the case. Chapter 40, verse 1, in the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city was struck down, on that very day, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me to the city. In visions of God, he brought me to the land of Israel and set me down on a very high mountain on which was a structure like a city to the south. So Ezekiel is having another vision. And this vision, he discusses a little later on that it is exactly like the one in the Chebar Canal. It's exactly like the vision in chapter 1. It's exactly like the vision in chapter 10. Twice it's mentioned throughout these 9 chapters, Ezekiel fell on his face. The glory of the Lord is something that we cannot understate. It is powerful, and it is going to force us, it is going to cause us to bow in adoration, to not be able to look upon God because of his glory, his magnificence. And Ezekiel, he bowed his head multiple times. This prophecy is the second to last one. It occurs in April of 573 BC. The last prophecy, which we already talked about a couple of weeks ago, was from Egypt. It occurred in 571 BC. And so this one is getting towards the end of their captivity. Ezekiel, it says, was set on a very high mountain. There are no mountains around Israel, no mountains around Jerusalem that are identical to what is described here. They're all relatively, flat. They're all sandy. They're all desert arid region. They're not these huge, tall, great big mountains. And so, not exactly sure which mountain it was. There are people who have speculations, but we know he was brought up on a very high mountain. The mountain, it seems, is like a structure, has a structure like a city. Verse 3, it says, when he brought me there, behold, there was a man whose appearance was like bronze, with a linen cord and a measuring reed in his hand. He was standing in the gateway, and the man said to me, Son of man, look with your eyes and hear with your ears, and set your heart upon all that I shall show you, for you were brought here in order that I might show to you, declare all that you see to the house of Israel. And so he goes up on this mountain. The whole purpose is that he will relay what he has seen to the people of Israel. What does he see? He says, behold, there was a wall all around the outside of the temple area. So he is seeing the temple. That is the primary purpose of Ezekiel seeing this vision, is that he sees the temple. I struggle really understanding the importance of the temple to the Israelites. Not that I don't logically understand it's important, right? I very much obviously understand that it is important to the Israelites that they have the temple. But to the degree that they find it important, that's a difficult mental exercise for me because we've never had a temple in that regard here. But the temple was the dwelling place of God. Right? The temple was revered. It was where they went to worship. It was where they went to offer sacrifices. The temple was holy. It was set apart. It was hopeful. The Israelites would have found the temple to be hopeful. They've been in exile for so long. So the temple is back. We get to worship our God. We get to be in the God is going to be in our presence again. That would have been such a hope-fulfilling message in the same way that knowing we can be forgiven of our sins fills us with hope. 1 John 1:5, we continue to walk in the light as he is in the light. He's faithful to cleanse us of all of our sins. That is a hope-fulfilling message for us. And the Israelites would have found the same hope in the temple and the structure of the temple, because it wasn't the structure, it was who dwelled within it. And that was God. This man, we've seen a man like bronze before early on. He has a linen cord and a measuring reed. The cord, the reed, they're used very extensively. In these next few chapters, we're not going to read through all of these because there's a lot of discussion about how many cubits something is. And go to verse 7 of chapter 40. The side rooms, 1 reed long and 1 reed deep, and the space between the side rooms, 5 cubits, and the threshold of the gate by the vestibule of the gate at the inner end, 1 reed. And he keeps going. There's a lot of these measurements that are used, which is where we get those pictures for the temple. It's also why the pictures vary, because even though it is slightly specific, it is not so specific as to be clear as to what it was that was to be built. In fact, Ezekiel, I posit, is the only one who knew exactly what that temple was supposed to look like. We talked a little bit earlier, a generic cubit is about 17 inches, a long cubit about 21. A rod is 10.3 feet. Sometimes the word reed is used. And so if you're ever going through and you want to try to figure out, well, just how big is this? One, people have done it, so you can Google that. But if you want to do the math, by all means, go ahead and do that. The long cubit used most often, 21 inches, and the rod or the reed is 10.3 feet. Verse 5 indicates that there is a wall. This wall, we often associate walls in ancient times with defensive structures, right? It is to keep people out. It is to protect the people inside. And while it certainly was to keep things out and to protect what is inside, it was not a defensive wall. It was a wall of separation. And it was separating the temple, the holy place, from, you might say, the rabble, right? The normal people, the unholy, from entering in. It's a separation of unclean things. All of the gates, east, north, and south, had the same measurements. There was no gate at the east temple, at the east side. That's where the temple was located. And so there were 3 gates all around. Let's go back and see if we can't see that. So there are 3 gates all around. You'll notice 1, 2, and 3, I think. It doesn't have the laser. But you see at the very top left, there is no gate. That's where the temple is. But every other place has these gates. All right. All of these measurements, and this is one of the things that I want us to understand multiple times throughout this book, but all of these measurements are perfect in their symmetry. They're perfect in their symmetry. It leads to a square. It is designed to be perfect, and that is because God is perfect. There are a lot of little things that I think we can miss if we are not careful in our reading, careful in our studies, and one of those is that God is perfect in all of his designs and all of the things that he does, including in an apocalyptic vision of a temple. God is perfect in all that he does. There is a mention of the priests' chambers and the sizes of their chambers. One of the names that you saw as you were reading through is Zadok. And I don't necessarily want to go into the history of Zadok, but I do want to talk about how we might have an appreciation for Zadok today. Zadok was a faithful priest of God. In fact, it talks about that through Ezekiel. He did not abandon the way the Levites did. The Levites were forced later on to do the menial tasks of the temple. But Zadok, he and his priests were able to minister to the Lord directly to God. And we see that people who followed after the idea that Zadok was the high priest were called Zadokites. And these Zadokites, over the history of time, especially given the origin of the language, Sadok or Sadducees is where they originated from. And so the Zadokites, the sons of Zadok, became the Sadducees. And we see the Sadducees in the New Testament. We see the Sadducees dealing with Jesus. And so that there is, in part, the division of the priesthood occurs earlier than this, but is present here. All right, before I move forward, are there any questions about chapter 40? Any other extra thoughts? Anything I missed? I am not. Would you like to? We can get you a microphone. Here in a little bit, I'm going to let Brother Goins get a microphone. Oh, he's got it.
Let's turn to Revelation 21 real quick. This is what happens when I get the last week of Ezekiel taken away from me. So, we did agree, though. We did agree.
We did.
Turn to Revelation 21, 20 and 21 in particular. The New Jerusalem is described in 20, and then 21, this apocalyptic language that Chris is talking about, I totally agree with the way to look at how this is described. The whole information here then is indeed to give them hope that they're going to be restored and going to go back out of captivity, they're going to be returned, but it's not exact, it's not literal language. But neither is the New Jerusalem of chapter 21. And look at verse 22 in particular, and then I'll be quiet. You good? All right, so, but I saw, in this New Jerusalem, I saw no temple in it. Isn't that surprising? I saw no temple in it. For the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. That's the hope that we have. And what is it that happens there? The city had no need for sun or moon or to shine, of the moon to shine in it. For the glory of God illuminated it, the Lamb and its light. So there's this hope of this new Jerusalem being built. And our hope as the Israel of God, in captivity, if you will, in this world, one day we'll be with him and the glory of God himself. And so this idea about how much this temple meant to these Israelites in captivity. We can't have the same emotional feel to it because we never experienced it. But we have an emotional feel to this kind of thing, right? To be with God in his glory, to be in the presence of God in heaven one day. That's the Revelation, apocalyptic language is used in Revelation that ties right into Ezekiel. Now, that's everything I would have covered next week.
Well, thank you, brother. That's what I get for asking if anybody has anything to add, huh? No, I appreciate that. Thank you. One of the things that, I have found in my studies is that there's always more study to be done. And there's always deeper to go, and there's always more understanding to be had. And, he asked the question, are you planning on covering Revelation, 21? No, I have not even gone down that hole. And so I'm grateful for you that you have had all this study and can put all this together. Chapter 41. Let's turn there, please. Chapter 41 details specifically, we're not going to spend a lot of time in 41, but it details specifically with the inner temple and the most holy place. which, again, for the Israelites would have been indicative of God's presence, right? So this would have been a very powerful reading for them, very powerful for Ezekiel to say it, for them to hear. Everything, again, here is symmetrical. It's where God would dwell on earth. The doors are given special attention in this chapter for a reason, because it is what keeps people out and what allows people in. And so only those that are worthy of the presence of God, only those who are sinless, who have been cleansed, who have been made righteous, will be allowed into the presence of God. Those who have sinned cannot enter. And so the doors have a good amount of attention in this chapter. The temple indicates a strong emphasis on worshiping God. Right? And so these chapters have a strong emphasis on the idea that we are to worship God. All right, chapter 42. This chapter deals with the priest's chambers, deals with other temple measurements. Here, the layout's not really 100% clear. Some things are certain in its construction. If you read through, you can see some of the things that make sense. The length of the building whose door faced north was 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 cubits, verse 2, right? There are certain things that's, okay, I know how big that is, but other than that, it's not overly clear. The chambers mentioned within this section are located on both the north and the south side of the temple, and there are, I assume, reasons for that. Again, not everything is overly explained. We can extrapolate and come up with reasons. But God wanted this to be in this specific way. We noticed that the chambers are 3 stories tall. And the whole premise of me talking about this chapter in this regard is it really makes a literal interpretation difficult. To look through this, to see all of these different measurements, to see these things, it makes a literal interpretation difficult because of the lack of detail and the lack of, really, I guess, specificity with regard to it. All right, 43. I told you guys we were going to be going quick through these. We're going to make it through 9 chapters today. Chapter 43. This chapter, we're going to read a little bit here. Verse 1, then he led me to the gate. Right, so he's still in the vision. He's still seeing this. He says, the gate facing east. Do y'all remember in chapter 10, the direction that God left and departed? He departed to the east. He departed to the east. And so verse 2, it says, behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the east. So God is returning in the way that he had come, and it says the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. And the vision I saw was just like the vision that I had seen when he came to destroy the city. And just like the vision that I had seen by the Chebar Canal, and I fell on my face. As the glory of the Lord entered the temple by the gate facing east, the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. Myron just talked about Revelation and how there will be no temple because the glory of the Lord, because the Lamb, because Jesus, they are the glory. They are what we worship, and we will be there with them. And we see the hope in that. Can you imagine what the Israelites would have felt, knowing that God's glory had already departed from them? They were in exile, they were gone, they were away from the temple, and yet here now they see that it's returning. That God is going to be with them again. God is going to protect them. God is going to provide for them. The last verse of chapter 48, don't know if we'll fully have time to get there, so I'm going to read it now because it fits in with what we're talking about. The very last verse of chapter 48, the circumference of the city shall be 18,000 cubits, and the name of the city from that time on shall be, the Lord is there. Yeah, absolutely. Brother Chris, not me, Brother Chris, other Brother Chris, said that in John 14, we see Jesus has said that there is, I go to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house, there are many rooms. And we see throughout these chapters that there are many rooms that are being prepared. And so the correlation is clear then because, well, the priests, those who are supposed to be ministering to the Lord, the faithful believers of God, we're going to be living in these rooms, so too will we, the priests. You're a holy priesthood, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. We will also be living in the rooms that God has apportioned to us. So thank you for that input. I appreciate that. Get back to where I was. Lost my place a little bit. The glory of God is returned. It is back. And the Israelites are going to be unbelievably excited about that. At least some of them are. We see that not all of them were. Not all of them returned. Some of them enjoyed the life in captivity because they became wealthy and they became prominent where they were. God tells Ezekiel that the people ought to be ashamed of what they have done. They need to change they need to repent, right? They need to turn back from what they had done. If you want for me to remain with you, you cannot continue living in sin, right? Is the message that God gives. Well, that's a very similar message to what we hear, isn't it? If we want God's presence to be within us, if we want the Spirit of God to be within us, if we want to be found righteous in the eyes of God, we cannot continue in sin. And just as God's glory fills the temple, so too we know that our body is a temple and we have the glory of God within us. It's just beautiful, isn't it? I already mentioned the offsprings of Zadok, only ones authorized to offer sacrifices. Chapter 44, a few things here just to detail what the Levites could do and what the Zadokites were supposed to do. The Zadokites, I guess the Levites had oversight at the gates of the house and they ministered in the house. The Levites were to slaughter the burnt offerings and sacrifices for the people, which I don't know about you, but does not sound like an overly pleasant job to just be slaughtering animals all day, or really at any time, but there's that. They also assisted the people in their worship, which doesn't sound all too bad, right? Like their jobs don't sound all too bad, but let's compare them to what the Zadokites were able to do. It says, come near to me and minister to me from God. And so those, the sons of Zadok, were to minister directly to the Lord. Well, who would you rather minister to? Would you rather be in the presence of God, or would you rather be in the presence of people? It says, stand before me to offer me the fat and the blood. So they offer sacrifices directly to God. It says, enter my sanctuary, come near my table and minister to me. Keep my charge. Keep my charge. There's a lot of other really interesting details about chapter 44, including some of the clothes that they wear, some of the rules and the laws they were to follow regarding marriage even. The marriage rules in 44 are more pronounced and difficult to follow than they are in the old law. So that's another interesting tidbit there. Chapter 45 goes over the land that was dedicated to God. And so 45 deals specifically with the holy district, deals with, it says, the portion for the prince. And so here is where some people have started to say, well, this is Christian symbolic in a lot of ways. But the princes were known in the past for being ruthless, for being violent, for being unfair. And so God has told them, listen, you are to put away violence. You are not to do violence. You are to put away destruction. You're not to destroy people. You're to practice justice and practice righteousness. You're to be right in the eyes of God. In fact, the princes were called to worship with the people. They were to do the exact same thing that everybody else was to do. All right. We are obviously out of time, and we have 3 whole chapters to get through, which is not going to happen. But let me real quick talk about 46. So Christian symbolism is often used to explain this one. There's 5 reasons it cannot be true. 1, Jesus sacrificed himself. Jesus did not sacrifice animals. He was the sacrifice. 2, Jesus was offered once. It says here that they're to be offered continually. Jesus offered himself once. The 3rd thing, Jesus' kingdom was not earthly, and here it promises an earthly kingdom. The 4th thing is that Jesus did not need to provide an offering for himself because he did not sin. And here the prince did offer for himself. And last, Jesus owned no property, and here the prince is given property. 47 is incredibly interesting with the water flowing. It deals with the blessings of God and all of that. Really, really interesting chapter. Go ahead and read through that if you can. And 48 just deals with the apportionment of land. All right, I got through 9 chapters. I'm going to tell myself I did it, and we're going to go from there. Next week, we're going over Daniel chapter 1. All right, so instead of 9 chapters, I get 1. All right, so read through Daniel 1, come prepared. I would like more discussion in next week's class. We didn't have too much time this week, but thank you all for your